Hey everybody, so now we're live, and my name is Arvydas. I welcome you all to this another AI Lithuania Meetup. I'm so happy to see all of you. It's amazing that today we have like this one more specialized like topic day or topic specific meetup. So today we are going to talk about AI and medicine. We have three amazing speakers. I won't hold a lot of your attention, but before I let the speakers take the stage, I'd like to remind you about a few things. First of all, next week we have our general meeting. So our association does general meetings every year. Next week is going to be one of the most important ones because we'll have a new board, like we are electing a new board. And we are also changing our bylaws. So if you are a member of the Artificial Intelligence Association of Lithuania, don't miss out this meeting. It's very, very important that everybody participates. Also, with this like new, I guess, stage in our association's life, you as not members, you can expect like even better meetups next time or even more events. So I'm very, very hopeful that after this, we'll emerge like even more powerful than we are right now. So that's one. Also, we have another big thing. That's our hackathon. So let me show you where you can find all of this important information. So if you visit our website, lithuania.ai, you can, first of all, you can find like, well, what meetups are these guys doing? So you can find like, hey, this is our like today's meetup. So you can know like what agenda we'll have, what speakers we'll have, all of that. I might have just shown you the agenda at the very start. But also you'll find things such as hackathons. So the AI Lithuania hackathon, oh, sorry, that's my misclick. So we have the hackathon right here. And that's all the information that you need, registration date, the date of the hackathon. There is going to take place even the prizes, like what the first prize or the best startup pitches, what the winners are going to win in terms of prizes. So that's all of the info about the Artificial Intelligence Association of Lithuania. And now I'd like to invite, let me see. Yeah, the first speaker, Arvydas Laurinavičius. He's from the National Center of Pathology and also from Vilnius University. He's today going to do a presentation, Computational Pathology for Precision Medicine. So Arvydas, please take the stage. Štai paruošiu jūsų prezentaciją. Taip, turėtų būti viskas ready. Prašau.
Labas vakaras, good evening.
One more final touch.
Okay. Yeah, it's better. Okay. Thank you for this opportunity to present to this brilliant audience. And I'm going to talk about computational pathology for precision medicine. And these days, when you look for some definitions, you ask robots, and quite many definitions of what is precision or personalized medicine. And actually, I like better term is arising with the digital transformation of the healthcare, which is high performance medicine, which is data-driven and augments our human capacities, human intelligence by applying artificial intelligence. As you can see in this sketch, this applies to all kinds of medical areas in our nowadays. So I'm going to talk about pathologists. So what is so special about pathologists? What is the special niche in our area? And then I will illustrate some topics that our research team is up to, and I will end with some short notice on the need of health AI ecosystems in our life. So the short answer about pathology was given in 19th century, as is your pathology, so is your medicine. And that applied to mostly to the feedback that physicians used to get from autopsy investigations those days to get some ground truth about the patient's condition. These days, we can say that some 70% of the decisions on pathology testing. So it's really expanded into clinical area, serving the patients in performing biopsies and cytopathology. My favorite definition is pathology is an information business. Pathologists provide useful answers to good questions. This is where we're coming to. And actually, we get samples, biological samples from the patients. We do our testing, and we provide information, biological or clinical or medical information. And this is our Center of Pathology, Valstybinis Patologijos Centras. We do some 1/3 of pathology tests in Lithuania. You can imagine we examine some kind of city like Panevėžys every year. So it's really quite good, big volume of cases. And we are paperless and partially glassless. So I would guess that we are most digitally transformed health enterprise in Lithuania. And for those who don't know, we are located right there on the eastern edge of Santara Medical Campus, behind the National Cancer Institute. So what happens? I have some issue with the slides. Not everything is displayed. Okay, so we have some empty boxes which I will need to write up. So with digital transformation, actually, what changes in medicine and in pathology, including, is the way we work. The processes, they become remote, more efficient. But the major benefit comes from obtaining or computing new knowledge from the pathology slides, which you see on the right there. This is to illustrate how the workstation of pathology may look like these days, and it's nothing much new. It's similar to radiology. We have kidney biopsy whole slide image on the right. We can review as a real microscopy slide, and on the left we see a laboratory information system where we make our reports. Applications in computational pathology may have several tasks, and most added value is expected from those computational applications which extend our capacities or capabilities as human beings, pathologists, beyond our visual perception. So what these can do, you can predict by using AI tools genetic alterations, you can predict patient outcome, you can predict response to therapies. And this is one of the examples what is very popular these days, to use deep learning for pathologist light reading. You see the workflow right here on the left, and I would point your attention to this A and B. Compares the amount of data which we have in pathologist light, and then on B you see computer tomogram. So the amount of data is really enormous in pathology, and it's incomparable to radiology or any other imaging techniques. So that also explains why these applications are so powerful. They're really impressive. And in addition, you also have, you see the image, the tissue infrastructure, the spatial interaction of cells, the microarchitecture, et cetera, and in this, there's a lot of hidden knowledge. And on the right, you see the applications in different tumor areas, which already some of them are clinically validated. They have FDA approval, and these numbers are increasing. So apart of this deep learning technique, which is really revolutionizing our area, we still have more traditional ways of image analysis than converting the data using for image analytics and developing disease models for basically all kinds of prediction of diagnosis, prognosis, and response to therapy. And my expectation is that for clinical use, we would need both of them. It's good to have end-to-end solutions based on deep learning to give you some detection, some probability of some genetic alteration. But in pathology and in medicine, we actually still want to measure the feature. And for measurements, we need more explicit metrics. So what do we do in our team? I will show 4 instances. To two disease models or statistical models of disease to measure intratumor heterogeneity and tumor host interaction, and then some other non-tumor pathology projects. So intratumoral heterogeneity, what is the concept? It's well known for oncologists and pathologists. What does it say? Tumor cells in an individual tumor are very different. They are represented by different tumor cell populations with different biological behaviors and response to therapies. So if you can apply very modern, powerful target therapy against one molecule, it may kill some tumor cells, but then others survive and kill the patient. So that's the major issue for therapy of these patients. And there are many solutions to that. Let's imagine the kitchen of pathologists. This is the slide, this is resected breast cancer tissue, and we look at this image. We need to estimate the ratio of brown cells, which are proliferating, aggressive cells, and blue cells. And we have to do this visually. So what we can do, we apply our not all the animation works, but okay. So we look at the tube vision with our microscope. We generate some semi-quantitative measures. But some time ago, we asked, can we apply a robot which reads in a systematic fashion and give us the matrix of the data so we can assess the whole tumor, not just random places. So what we actually did this, I have some technical problems. The resolution now is decreasing. That's a bit strange. Some kind of hackathon, something. Kill the resolution during the presentation. That's the challenge. Okay, so we applied a hexagonal grid to subsample image analysis data from the tumor. And this way we got quite comprehensive data set from a single microscopy slide. Instead of one or two figures, we have some 20 indicators which reflect various features of the biomarker distribution within the tissue. Then we can go and look at the indicators. You have Karolis entropy there, you have Ashman's disease, you have heterogeneity measures. You can visualize the roughness of the tube's proliferative surface, and then you can go back to the original tissue and see where the most proliferative areas are. So we called it Pareto hotspot, which is 20% of the hottest area than the tumor. So we hope that this way we find some better measure of proliferation rate. And I didn't mention that in some breast cancer patients, chemotherapy decision is made based on proliferation activity. So it's not just playing around, it's a very important clinical data. And we tested this approach on Nottingham breast cancer patient cohort, and we got a surprise that the intratumor spatial heterogeneity of proliferation rate was more important, more informative to predict patient survival than any other expression level of the biomarker expression. This was our first surprise, but now we have accumulated quite a lot of data that this happens in many tumors and may have some fundamental, also practical implications. So you may ask, why hexagons? Can I ask you to raise hands who is applying hexagonal tiling in your work? Gaming, anyway? Okay, so we're quite original here. So the mathematics was invented already in 19th century, and the hexagonal grid has two important features. It has high effectiveness of circle coverage, and it has uniform distance between cells and their centers. So that's important if you want to compute Karolis entropy measures, for example. So then you have unbiased assessment of texture, for example. It is commonly used in geography, ecology, robotics, gaming. And I would just like to acknowledge people who started us on this way, Benoit Plencoulin and Paul Helin from Normandy University. So they put us on this road, and then we continued this. This is Alan Rasmussen now, who is also here in the hall, who is developing now hexagonal tiling or grid tool, which is implemented into our computational environment at our National Center of Pathology. what actually it does, it uses the outputs of the commercial image analysis tool there on the top, Halo AI, from Intercollapsing US. So we use it for regular image analysis, also for AI applications, but then the outputs of this tool are reprocessed by this grid tool, and then we use SAS and other statistical analysis tools to further model the outputs. The second model is tumor-host interaction. Why it is important? It's very important for precision immuno-oncology. Tumors, again, these are not just cancer cells, but this is the host cells which are around, and also immune cells which are fighting the tumor or are supposed to fight the tumor. But what happens, tumors commonly suppress the immune response. So now the novel immunotherapies are actually reactivating patients' immune response to fight against cancer. And this is much more efficient than just killing the cells, because then now the immune cell is more dynamic, flexible, and it does its own work. So these figures illustrate the effect of, see, for the patient survival, the chemotherapy compared to targeted therapy. You get some prolonged short-term survival, maybe a few months, half a year, but then the end is more or less the same. The tumor wins. In comparison, these immune therapies, actually, they have long-term effect, and it's incomparable efficiency compared to the current toxic or targeted therapy. So, and it happens that immune cell spatial distribution within the tumor is very informative, telling the prognosis and the behavior of the disease. So there are quite many methods already proposed. Some of them are just based on assessing cell densities within the invasive margin. Some of them assess the shape, the quantity, the size of the lymphocyte clusters in the tumor. Some of them measure distances between the tumor cells and lymphocytes. Some are very sophisticated, expensive, and fancy. They measure multiple biomarkers, and they discover very interesting results. So, and many of these models work. And so, because I think the biology behind this lymphocyte spatial distribution in the tumor microenvironment is very, very telling. And again, I apologize for this distorted slide. It's a bit, looks nice. So we ask, where's the tumor and host interaction happening? You have tumor cells and you have stroma, so-called. So it is supposed to be not only a line or a ribbon, it's rather a zone or area. So then we asked, can we apply hexagonal grid analytics to detect those tumor interaction zones and measure the lymphocyte behavior? This is a bit similar on this computer game, which I found on the web just by Googling. The same ideas. We have the enemy, the target tissue, the tumor tissue, and they have your infrastructure, your resources, your army coming to fight the enemy. And we hypothesized that maybe the spatial behavior of lymphocytes in this front line may be informative to say what is the behavior of this special tumor. And actually, we did this by, again, utilizing the image analysis outputs and designed this algorithm, which we called tumor edge or interface zone immunogradient. So first of all, we detect where's the tumor edge just by computing the probabilities of interfaces for each hexagon based on the contents of each individual hexagon, and then the surrounding hexagons, then the second generation of hexagons. So actually, it's a rule-based, explicit rule-based probability detection, which then you see these yellow hexagons are the highest probability, which is, we call it tumor edge. And then you have this possibility to go towards the tumor deeper. So you have the rank information. So you see the darker shades of red towards the tumor and darker shades of gray towards the host. So we still keep the spatial information within this interface zone. And next thing we do, we assess lymphocyte densities of each zone, and already these examples show you that the spatial behavior of the lymphocyte densities across the interface zone is quite different in different tumors. Sometimes the lymphocytes are increasing in densities, so they're enthusiastic to enter the tumor. Sometimes they just stop at the edge. So this is a very sensitive way to pick up those behaviors, which we find maybe that's one of the most sensitive ways to measure this feature. And here's an example of the tumor. You see the interface zone detected here, and then we compute the indicator. Actually, it is center of mass, and we named it as immunogradient as a type of indicator. And we have accumulated quite a lot of data. I'll just show just one example what the power of this approach might be. So these are breast cancer patients. This is alveolar hormone receptor breast cancer, which is not very aggressive disease. So it has good therapies. So 92% of the patients survived after 5 years after the surgery, after the tumor was excised. But then what happened? Over the next 5 years, you have quite dramatic split of survival probabilities, 55% versus 87%. And the feature which helps us to predict this is immunogradient, low or high. And this also has some medical and biological implications that by investigating the tumor, which is excised now from the patient, we can say the probability of long-term survival 10 years later. And of course, it may have implications for patient monitoring. They need special different tactics. We have submitted a patent application based on this method. And from various studies I just counted, we have over 800 patients already investigated by these methods of hexagonal grid analytics, and we find some quite important new knowledge from these data. All these are published already, and we still have some to come. Okay, the third example is out of tumor. I'm kidney pathologist, so I'm not a tumor pathologist, so this is my native area here. So kidney is quite complex organ. You see, it has quite complex architecture. It has glomeruli, you have tubules, peritubular capillaries in yellow, and then arteries. So we assess it visually, but there are things that we need to measure. So here you see a quite good example of the structure segmented and classified, but not just to feel the beauty, but what we actually need to do. This is just first step. We imagine this as dismantling the kidney into components, and then measure each component separately, and then reassemble the data into a big data set to do multivariate modeling of the features that we want to extract and measure. And last example is quite different. Maybe for those who are interested in imaging techniques, we have that's another area, and that's everything I showed until now was based on bright field microscopy, which is most common in pathology. But in pathology, we have many opportunities to have alternative imaging. These are just listed out here. So this way, we can increase a set of tools, ways to image to get the image signal, not only in bright field or radiology, we just have a combination of those. And then we have many ways to analyze those data. So it's really multidimensional field of opportunities that you can find in computational pathology. So we have implemented two innovative techniques with the inventors. One is based on deep UV, and another is polychromatic polarization. And if someone is interested, I think polychromatic polarization is still waiting its future. We still need to standardize this imaging, and it gives a good alternative to bright field. It's label-free. You don't need to stain, and you can combine with many other imaging techniques, just having alternative signals per same pixel. And last but not least, last few words on perspective, where we are going. There's a common question to ask in medical conferences, will AI replace physicians? So what is your answer? Raise your hands in favor if you say yes. It's quite dangerous. It's usually in conferences they say, no, will not replace, so stay calm. What will really happen, it will not replace, but it is transforming our practice. And this is one of the predictions here. It was estimated how different medical specialties would change in terms of repetitive tasks versus creative, and then data-based or interaction-based. And guess where is pathology? Pathology is most creative and most data-based, similar to radiology, but we are more creative. And why is that? Because we have more unstandardized situation. We have more variation of pathologists, methods, situations, variable disease. So that explains that we still need to deal with more uncertainty in our. So the domain is really broad and getting more and more powerful. So what do we need in medicine? And I think Lithuania should go in that direction. The healthcare will transform into multimodal data-driven intelligence ecosystem. So pathology is not everything. We still need to combine with radiology, laboratory data to have this real data sets, and we have AI system learning online and acting real time for individual patients. This is where we need to go. And the roadway is not very easy, but there's also big investment in Europe. There's a European digital pathology platform. I think 60 million euros invested, 50-50 by Euro Commission and pharma industry. So they are creating this European digital pathology data bank which is very important, not to just only to discover, but to validate your tools, because it's easy, some kind of easy to discover, but the clinical medicine requires quite rigid validation efforts. And this is our team, not all of them. And this is what we looked yesterday on we have 3 times meeting. You see some smiles, but also some puzzled. We have it quite agile. I will also acknowledge our grants in the past. We had some good opportunities to grow on those inputs. And also, I'm happy to announce that we're going to organize the European Congress of Digital Pathology next year. So please mark your calendar, June 5th to 8th. It's not announced yet broadly. So thank you very much.
We have time for only maybe 2 questions.
Yes, I have one. Why microscopy is used? You mentioned microscopy, not some MR scanning or just microscopy you mentioned, right? What
yes.
Patient?
Why microscopy versus
scanning? Let's say some magnetic scanning.
Oh yeah, it's very important.
Can you please repeat the question?
Yeah, why we use microscopy instead of MRI scanning, for example. Yeah, the basic difference between pathology and MRI scanning and other radiology techniques, it's in vivo versus ex vivo. In pathology, we have ex vivo sample processed. So it's an invasive procedure for the patient. But we have the sample in our hands. We can cut, stain, process everything. And then the microscopy is the main technique which is used to analyze the features of the disease. In MRI, you do image analysis, but this is in vivo image, less resolution, less invasive. It's not invasive, basically. So these are quite different domains. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, but can it MRI scanning not substitute, but add additional value to this somehow? Well, you have a 3D scanning, or you see the full picture.
Of pathology sample,
yeah.
You mean? Yeah. There are some experimental works, but it's mostly for research. You can do 3D reconstruction of, for example, mouse brain with fluorescence. It looks very nice, but it's so expensive, and it's still the application is to discover something. But for clinical medicine, you see something affordable And that's just different applications.
Right, one more question. Everybody's shy.
About hexagon.
Okay.
Could you elaborate more? Like, is there some kind of a sliding window technique, or it looks weird to me, as I'm used to image processing in squares with square windows, and it's interesting. How is it with the coordinate system? How is it? It sounds weird from the data perspective.
Yeah, we have an expert sitting behind you. Well, you may correct me, but if I'm wrong, but pixels originally were hexagonal, then they were simplified. That's the story. But yes, I think hexagons, you mentioned sliding window. Yes, you can do this. You can do multi-resolution hexagonal grid analysis, and there are also rules. You can aggregate hexagons, based on hierarchies. It's not very easy, but there's a huge science behind. So what we actually do now, we're not using sliding window too much, but in our experiments, we usually test the different resolution of the grid, which is relevant to the task that we are applying. So multi-resolution grid gives you, multi-resolution perspective. And maybe someday it may be connected to deep learning also techniques, but it's maybe a fantasy right now, but I know.
Right, so thanks, Arvydas, once again.
Okay.
Now I'd like to invite Karolis Šablauskas from Ligence. Karolis is going to tell us about MLOps for medical ultrasound data. Give me a second to switch the slides for you. There we go. Let's hope everything works.
Thank you.
Look, laikyk mikrofoną arti, kad girdėtų žmonės čia.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm very happy that we finally can do a whole session about AI in medicine just based on our Lithuanian experience. So I represent company Ligence, which is the second part of the word intelligence. The first one was already taken by another company. And today I will talk about machine learning operations for medical ultrasound data, but hopefully some general principles also apply for other use cases. So at Ligence, we deal with echocardiography data. And echocardiography is visualization of the heart using ultrasound waves. And it's a diagnostic test that's used in diagnosing various diseases of the heart, such as heart failure or valvular disease. In Lithuania, cardiovascular diseases are still number one. So you might have seen a test that looks similar to this. Basically, you have the patient lying down on the bed, then a human operator performing the test using the machine that you can see over here. And the part that our company deals with revolves around all of those buttons that you can see. So that's actually where we generate value, because as a cardiologist, you have to do a couple hundred clicks for each patient. And basically our value proposition is that you don't actually need to do that. We can perform this for you. So one funny thing I noticed before the presentation in the stock image, that most of you probably know that the heart is located on the left side, and for some reason the probe is on the right side. So yeah, but the patient looks happy and the image resembles the heart. Yeah, so I will tell you about two technical details. which are specific to the problem that we are solving. So one of them is that in most situations, the images that we get from the ultrasound are actually 2D slices of the heart. And as you can understand, the heart is actually a 3D object. So what you see here are different slides, or in cardiology, these are called views that you obtain by manipulating the probe. And these projections of the heart are actually standardized. So you normally have a couple of positions where you put the probe to get the general overview of the heart. So for example, in the image B, you can see the most common view, which is called apical 4 chamber. It is called that because you can see all 4 chambers of the heart, which in this case are these 4 cavities. So for example, LV in this case stands for the left ventricle. It is the largest chamber of the heart, and it's the one that pumps all the blood to aorta and to the rest of the body. And if we look over here, we can see that the probe is on a different position. So we can see some of the same structures, but others as well from a different viewpoint. So what I'm getting at with all of this information, that one of the tasks that we have to solve is actually recognizing the position of the probe so that we can know which chambers or structures of the heart to expect. And you probably guess that this is a classification problem. And another thing that I will quickly mention is that in ultrasound, we can use the Doppler effect, which applies to most types of waves, including ultrasonic. So this allows you to visualize the blood flow in the heart. And what you can see in this image is that the red color shows blood flowing towards the probe, and the blue part shows the blood flowing in the other direction. So basically with this simple test, which is non-invasive, it doesn't have radiation, you can get the size and the shape of the heart, and you can also see whether the blood is flowing in the right manner. So the product that we developed is called Ligence Heart, and this is a system for automated echocardiography analysis. And what makes me happy is that we, as far as I know, one of the 2 companies in Lithuania that managed to get this certified as a medical device. And the other company is Oxipit, and you will hear their speaker after my talk. So this is what the product itself looks like. So you normally acquire all the images, then you go to a workstation, which is any computer in the hospital, and you can see all of the images that you acquired. And what we do is perform all the measurements. So in this case, you can see the borders of the chambers of the heart, which you could probably guess can be accomplished using a segmentation neural network. You can see some other examples for other types of imaging over here. So for example, on the right side, hopefully you can see a sample of landmark detection. And I will show it in higher resolution very soon. So in the end, what we provide is a standardized report. So if any of you had this test performed, there is a long list of parameters that you later bring to a cardiologist or your family physicians, and then they can make some decisions based on that. So what we do is basically provide the cardiologist with this report. Okay, so now the moment of truth, we will see whether it's feasible to run a video from a PowerPoint slide. So with this, I would like to show the landmark detection part. I mentioned that one of the tasks that we do is the segmentation, where we find the borders of those cavities. Sometimes you need to do linear measurements. And actually, this is my go-to question for the interviews. So most people know how to perform segmentation, and it becomes more complicated when you try to do landmark detection. So what you can see here is that the images that we're dealing with, they are those images of a beating heart, which means that they are moving. So we have to perform all of our predictions on each frame. And hopefully you can appreciate that a similar architecture that performs segmentations can achieve this task as well. In this case, you only need to change the segmentations for heat map predictions, and you can use the same architecture. So these colored parts are actually the heat maps, the probability distributions for some specific key point. Okay, now another example with the segmentations. I only included this because it looks nice, and it also illustrates two different tasks that we perform. So one is, of course, the segmentation. But if you look at these letters over here, so for example, this stands for apical four-chamber view. And this was the view that I mentioned in the beginning. So videos that look something like this, and we have to classify them, basically assign them to a specific position of the probe. And in this case, we have the same left ventricle, the largest piece of the heart, visualized from the three different sides. So basically, if we visualize it from three different viewpoints, we can almost get a 3D understanding of the structure. And finally, here's the live demonstration. So we can plug our software into the ultrasound machine and stream the video information and perform these segmentations and classifications in real time. So that's actually where most of our current effort is going to. Okay, so now we move on to the actual machine learning operations part, and that's the part that is the most exciting for me from the development standpoint. So I like to think about this having two different parts, and the first one has to do with data. So the number that you have to do is data collection, and then you have to perform some sort of annotation. So in our case, we use a human label as well as semi-supervised approach. And the second part actually has to do with so in our case, that's using annotated to train, and then finally them, and we can complete this by finding the case where our model underperforming, ahead, collect additional and read everything. So in our case, we have access to around 12,000 echocardiography studies, and each of these contains multiple videos as still images. And usually it's around 40 to 80 videos or still images per patient. So we collect all that. We use frames as data points. And if we multiply everything, we have access to around 300,000 frames. So in our case, this is beyond what's feasible to be annotated by a human labeler. So as I mentioned, we use both the human experts, and whenever we can, we try to use some semi-supervised methods. And that usually involves running a very large model, which you wouldn't use in production, and then trying to filter out wrong predictions using common logic. We also have our internal modeling app, which is actually named Barušauskas. Basically, you can assign sets of images and can mark this as complete. If you want an expert cardiologist to take a look at that, also assign them to that. and so on. So we really try to optimize the workflow for this so that the data label team have to spend more time than need. So I mentioned that the that we are dealing with mostly classification, segmentation, and landmark detection. And I like to think about landmark detection almost the same thing as segmentation, with the mainly the final layer having different neurons. Whenever training these multiple models, and I think we currently have 8 or more, and it's growing, adding additional measurement. Our aim is to test the hypothesis as we can, and whenever possible, we try to use the null hypothesis approach. So if we say, okay, there is this new architecture called transformer, which is supposed to be better than convolutional neural networks, let's have a hypothesis that transformers are superior to convolutional networks in our use case, and see whether we can disprove this hypothesis. One of the things that we quickly into was actually deciding, okay, how do we make the decision to say that one model is superior to the other? An obvious example is that you can have higher accuracy metrics, but if the architecture has so much computational overhead, it's not feasible to use in real life scenario. So it's something that we also have to be wary about. It would be nice that we could just take something that looks like this, where the gold, like the radiologists in the world, and also frontal, and stop them the meter or something. Unfortunately, it's not that simple in our case. So just to give a brief illustration, we have a lot of these when talking to potential customers. The images, you can see different approaches for measuring the same distance. So in the A, you can see that it's starting from right over here and going to this edge. But in the image B, they're starting a couple of millimeters lower, so from the internal border to the internal border. And depending on who you ask, they might have different opinions on which way is the right one. So another thing to notice is that we have a lot of noise in these images, right? It's non-invasive. It doesn't have radioactivity. So we have a lot of these ultrasound artifacts. And it's natural that the evaluation in ultrasound is subjective. And cardiologists are highly trained, but I can say that they can sometimes be opinionated. And I was having a discussion with our main cardiologist, and he was saying, you know, I would like the model to be like a little bit to the right or something. And each time he would have some comments on the measurements that were made for the model. So at one point I said, okay, let's do an experiment. And I took one of the measurements that was made by the cardiologist himself, showed the image to the cardiologist and asked him, hey, what do you think about this measurement? And he was like, yeah, but you know, I would adjust this just a little bit. And dude, this is something that you made yourself, right? So you won't be perfect with your predictions. So in our case, to really decide what's the ground truth, we decided to use data from 4 different cardiologists who looked at the same set of images. And this allowed us to obtain what's called the inter-rater variability. And I can tell you that in ultrasound data, this can be quite high. So one of the most common measurements, ejection fraction, which is rated from 0 to 100%, can differ up to 10% between different cardiologists. What we then did is, after waiting a week, showed the same images to the same set of cardiologists, because if you take the same cardiologist and they look at the same image twice, you will get a little bit different results, right? And this is a very well documented phenomenon. So, for example, one hospital noticed that they got pretty different results depending if it was the regular work week cardiologist or the weekend cardiologist, which is probably less experienced. So basically this allows us to get a range of what's acceptable for each specific measurement. And there are some measurements which can be very precise, and then there are others which are more subjective. So our guiding principle in saying whether this is correct or not is asking whether this falls within the range that we expect to see between different human specialists. So the main goal with having ML ops or machine learning operations is this. You click once, it pulls all your data, and then you chill and go get coffee and show the excellent results. Of course, in reality, it's not that simple, but we try to do that and to make our life easier whenever possible. So as I mentioned, we try to formulate specific hypotheses, and we do actually have a repository that's called MLOps. And using that, you can create different configs. So for example, one for model A and one for model B. And this will take it and pass it through the whole model training and exporting process. So it will query the database, it will check whether there are some new labels, download those, it will resize everything, prepare the data, train your models, run it on the test data set, and finally, we also export the models in a format that's feasible for production. So we use Onyx, which is very convenient to use for Python or exporting to mobile devices and so on. So it's platform independent. But to actually get it into production, that's the part where, at least in our case, we still have to use human involvement. We have to run it through that benchmarking process. In our case, that's 4 cardiologists that looked at all the images twice. So basically, we take a set of studies where we run everything using production code, and that can take up to an hour. So it's not that easily automatable. And then if you say that this model is really performing better, you have to make the pull request yourself, and you have to provide the evidence that it's indeed better. Right, so a couple of words on the transitions happening in ultrasound space and I guess in medicine in general. So most of you are probably familiar with these ultrasound machines on the left. So these are bulky and they are semi-portable, I would say. They have wheels, but it takes some effort to get them near the patient. And what's happening now is there are these point-of-care ultrasound devices that you can fit into your pocket. It's basically the ultrasound probe, but you're using a mobile device, a phone or a tablet for all the processing. And one of the ideas is that this device can replace the stethoscope, right? Because with stethoscope, you only get audio information, while with ultrasound, you can get visual. And I've tried these portable ultrasound devices. In practice, it's not as convenient because you have to hold the ultrasound probe in one hand and the tablet in the other. So it's needs some tweaking a little bit, but at least we believe that's the future. And it seems that most of our competitors are looking in the same direction. So what we've been working in the past couple of months is actually transferring the technology that we have into mobile devices. And that's actually not as difficult to do as I first expected when we brainstormed about this idea. So now we have a working model, which is also CE cleared as a medical device. So basically, what you need to do is to get a single number from this test. So these POCUS devices, they do not replace the full machines, but for some very specific measurements in situations where you need to make a quick decision, you can use this predicted number to know that the patient's heart is fine or not. And the hope is that we can provide these handheld ultrasound devices to non-specialists. So for example, other doctors, not necessarily cardiologists, or maybe nurses. Right, so my take-home messages for this talk is to really spend the time on trivial stuff, which is sometimes not that simple. So in our case, that's finding the right metric to track, and obviously cleaning the data and trying to catch annotation errors, because to be frank, these are the places where we had most of the easiest improvements in performance. And what I also noticed is that slowly but consistently adding changes will lead to improvements in the performance. So I would like to thank past and present employees of Ligence that made all of this possible. So Mark Foxon, who was the brain behind machine learning operations, Antanas Kiziela, the systems architect, and others. And as a final note, we are hiring ML engineers. It's required to provide the salary agents, so I'm leading by example. Right, so thank you, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
How much your code dependent on the brand of like a scanner? Is it like a for one type of scanner or like a combination?
No, it's actually vendor agnostic. Yeah, so the training data set contains multiple devices. Of course, what we see with these handheld ultrasound machines, the quality of images is lower, so the performance is lower as well.
So which is better, transformer or scanner?
Oh yeah, I was waiting for this question. So it actually depends on the task. So for example, for classification, in our case, it's not that difficult of a task. I think it's really difficult to beat ResNet 18. But for those really fine-grained segmentations or key point detections where you need to argue with the cardiologist, yeah, the transformer really shines there.
How you want to deal with the difficult patients? I mean, if you have an image too noisy, how it's accepted by your artificial intelligence platform? Did you try to, do you know the limits where is image quality acceptable or not?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So we do provide a confidence score for our predictions. However, I can tell you that sometimes you get really high confidence and still the model is wrong. So I try not to rely on that too much. So there are some indirect indicators where the image quality is not reliable. The good thing for us is that if you have low quality image and you look at the measurements performed by a cardiologist, you will get a higher range of variation. So it's easier for us to say that we're correct.
We have time for
one more question.
What things you think your company can improve at this time, so you have a more accurate and precise estimations of the diseases and
Sorry, yeah, could you repeat the question?
yeah, but well, you say that your product needs more development in order to have more accurate estimations. So, what as a company would you like right now in order to come to that point that you will have a realized product?
Can you also repeat the
Yeah.
question for the home users?
Yeah, so the question was basically what we need to improve to have an excellent product, right? Yeah, so it's a continuous process to be fair. Whenever you think that the model is performing well, you find new horizons. I think in our case, the number one thing that we want to achieve is have the higher number of patients on which we have validated this data set, because still the device is mainly validated on the population in Europe. But if we go to something more exotic, for example, to Asia, where we encounter other machines or like some other pathologies that we hadn't seen before, yeah, so just basically being able to say that this generalizes well, because at the moment we do know the cases where it won't work well, and we do not advise in using the software in those specific situations. Okay.
Right, so one more big hand. So right now I'd like to invite Darius from Oxipit. And also a very quick reminder that after his speech, we'll have pizzas right here, short discussions. And then I'm gonna ask all of you to move to San Diego at about 9. We have like a table booked there. So Darius, let me help you with the setup.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Darius Barušauskas, and I'm one of the co-founders of Oxipit. So Oxipit is a startup working with medical images, and we're using deep learning to build AI solutions for hospitals all around the world. And today I'll speak about our autonomous solution for radiology, which we have been developing for several years now. Yeah, so what is radiology? So just a simple illustration what it is. So radiology is a field of medicine where we have doctors called radiologists who work not with patients, but with images. And their main task is to look at the image and do interpretation of the image. So if the patient is healthy or if there is some abnormality present, and if a patient is abnormal, he is tasked to write what kind of diseases the radiologist suspects. And well, his main task is to write a radiology report, which then goes to the actual doctor who actually correlates the report information with other patient indicators, and then decides on the diagnosis. So as you can see, there is a lot of room for deep learning here, because well, we have images, and well, deep learning is very good at image analysis. However, there is a slight problem. Actually, radiologists not only look at the image, but they also kind of try to incorporate all the context surrounding the patient. So, for example, the reason why the patient was why the X-ray was done in the first place. Maybe the patient was coughing or so. Then we look at the patient history. Maybe there is some chronic disease which may account for some of the findings. And of course, we might look at the previous images and try to see how different the current images to the previous studies. And this is where the problems start in radiology for AI. So the imaging part is easy. There are standard protocols, how images are taken, how they are sent to the other servers, and this context information is actually varies a lot between different hospitals. So it would not surprise me that the hospital would develop its own solution just to store all the context information about the patient. And there is not like unified standard of doing things. So as a radiology AI vendor, you kind of have to make a decision not to use that information because, well, it's just not a scalable business. And this kind of limits the usefulness of AI solutions. So what we have discovered and seen, so when the patient is abnormal, we kind of analyze the image. We can analyze the context, analyze the patient history, which we cannot do. But when it's a normal X, the context doesn't matter that much. Actually, if you have shown the normal X-ray to a radiologist, it would take him just a couple of seconds to say, well, this is a normal patient, and I do not see any kind of abnormalities. And knowing this, we kind of decided, well, this is a right path to go, just to focus on the normal studies, and maybe there's something interesting that can be done. And we have developed a product called ChestLink. So it is an autonomous solution which acts like an agent, is able to accurately say that, well, this X-ray is normal or not. And the key, like the most important part, that we aim for the software to make as little errors as possible. So just if we have shown the same X-ray to many different radiologists, we expect that most of them would agree with the ChestLink's opinion. And yeah, so we were able to achieve up to 40% of automation rate regarding chest X-rays. So this number is a bit sketchy. You will understand later on because it depends on some factors. But the key factor here is that the software acts autonomously, so there is no need for a radiologist to look at the image. So we kind of save time, save resources, those precious resources in hospitals, in the radiology departments. Yeah. So when we started developing this software, we kind of had to limit ourselves of what we are trying to achieve. So first of all, we kind of said that, okay, we will only analyze images of adults. So there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, there's some legal constraints about like children data and how they can be processed. So we did not want to like go deep into the rabbit hole trying to address this issue. But the second reason is that, well, if a child is healthy, no one is going to do an X-ray anyway. This would be a bad practice, I think. So mostly, if we have children X-rays, they are mostly abnormal anyway. So there's kind of no use of having this kind of software for this subpopulation. The other population, the subgroups we identified is the patients who are able to stand up and patients who cannot. So they are like laying in bed, like in hospitals and so on. So we kind of discarded the second patient group because, well, if you're unable to stand, that's very unlikely that you're a healthy person. So we kind of limit ourselves just to people who are able to stand, and we can take an X-ray appropriately. Then another restriction, we kind of set ourselves that we want to have images which are of good quality, meaning that all the organs are visible in the X-ray, for example, or like technical parameters are satisfactory and such. So like in a real setting, a radiologist might say, maybe given the image on the right, well, that the patient is normal, but I would still recommend like repeating the X-ray just to evaluate that missing part. So, and this is important because, well, our software does not do any recommendations. It's just like tells the fact, well, not the fact, but opinion whether it is normal or not, and does not do any recommendations in that space. Yeah. So these are like three basic filters for our software. Then I often get asked, what about patient data? Do you use like age, gender, race, and any other available information which is accessible in the image metadata? And the answer is no. There is very simple explanation to that. When you go to clients and try to like sell the product, and you often get into this discussion that they want the data to be anonymized before sending it to the software. So all the patient information is not accessible for us. And well, it might seem like a problem, but actually it is not. So there are a couple of Kaggle competitions which try to predict patient's age and gender from the image itself. So the models are actually pretty impressive and accurate. I've tried it myself. I would say that these metrics really aren't that high. And for example, the race prediction comes from the researchers who analyzed, well, built the very same model predicting if the patient is Black, white, or Hispanic. And well, this metric is also very, very impressive. Well, for a human, it is an impossible task to say if the person is Black or white just from an X-ray. And well, nobody is asking them to do that. So the takeaway from this is that, well, we don't have this patient metadata available to us directly, but actually the models themselves are fully capable of learning this information just from the images alone. And well, you just don't have to overcomplicate yourself with some heuristics, whether this is an anonymized study or not. Yeah, so this is a slide I will spend a bit more time on. So we can imagine if we took like, say, 100 million X-rays, a wide spectrum of possible X-rays, how they look and appear on the images. So let's say on the left side we have completely normal images, and on the right side we have obviously abnormal images, and something in between is like moving from the left to the right. We encounter like subtle changes, then we encounter some intermediate changes which are already visible, and so forth. So there is a range of X-rays, and radiologist is encountering with them each and every day. They kind of have to decide at which point this new X-ray could be placed in this like interval, and based on that he has to make a decision, for example, to write if a patient is normal or not. And what we have observed actually is that models which we train on actually behave in the very, very same way. So the correlation between the subtlety of the image correlates very well with the probability of the detected abnormality. So this is nice to have. And what typically radiology AI vendors would do, they would software which would be able to say, well, this patient has COVID or not, for example, and they have to decide on the threshold on which they decide, well, if the probability is over that, we say it's COVID. If it's under that, it's not COVID. And this is actually a hard task. It's not, there is no like, universal approach, which is well, universally accepted and correct. And yeah, so this is a bit of a problem. So what companies try to do is try to find the operating point which acts like an average radiologist, let's say. In our case, it's a bit different. We're not building a software for radiologists. We're building a software for hospitals. So the idea is that, well, these images will not be seen by a radiologist, and we have to find our own threshold at which you would say that we're making not many mistakes. And on the other hand, we have we want to maximize the number of images we want to automate. So we have these two clashing forces together, and it is a job for us to find this line at which you would say that, well, this is it, and this is as good as we can get regarding some specific model. And so far I've talked about one specific radiological finding, but actually there are about 100 radiological findings we have to address, and for each of these findings we have to go through all this logic and establish some operating thresholds. Yeah, so what we have done, we kind of thought that it is an impossible task to do it manually, just to find this optimal point for when you, let's say we have 10 models, and 10 models predict, let's say, 100 different radiological findings. So I call them features. And we do not have any prior knowledge what is the optimal threshold for each of the feature. And then we kind of run the optimization algorithm with some optimization function, which for us is like, we established that we want to have very high sensitivity, so something like 99.9%, and we want to maximize the specificity. So the specificity translates to how many images can we actually automate. And yeah, so the optimization algorithm optimizes these values, and we have some threshold values. But it might seem like a simple problem, like a simple statistics problem, just take data, optimize, and get results. But actually, we have to involve humans in this procedure. So, as I mentioned before, 99.9%, there's still 0.1% images which could be identified as potential errors. So what we do is we go to experts, radiologists, and ask them to review these cases, which might be, let's say, errors, and we ask them, so looking at those images, are there any cases which would potentially cause harm for the patient? And if yes, please make us suggestions which model thresholds should be adjusted, and so forth. So this is a combination of statistics and expert knowledge, which we kind of incorporate and use to define this final result we have. It's kind of hard to explain it in a few minutes. It's very big topic. I could talk about it in more than an hour, I think, but this is where we actually excel as a company. We know how to do it and how to reach very good values in terms of product performance. Yeah, so regarding models themselves, so as I said before, we have about 10 models. We have classification, detection, and segmentation models. I marked in the green bar which methodology is superior compared to the others. So, for example, classification requires less labeling effort. So in radiology, you have images and reports. So you just run text mining algorithms and get some labels and run your simple, or maybe not so simple, convolutional neural networks, transformers or so. But you already know beforehand that this approach, well, it is effective, but it is suboptimal if you add better annotated data sets. So knowing that we have 100 different radiological findings, some are less important, some are more important, and some are actually very critical, we kind of say, well, okay, let's do classification models, relevant findings, and use these strong models for critical findings. And actually, we're spending a lot of resources, annotations, to annotate large volumes of data sets. So we actually have a nodule data set. So nodule is like signs of cancer, and we have gathered a data set of 300,000 nodules, which is very impressive by itself. There is no well, at least I do not know any equivalent data set available for this specific task. And this actually allows us to build very good models and improve the overall performance of our models. So this is a few examples of how we kind of deal with different radiological findings. So for tuberculosis, we use classification. For fractures, abnormalities, we use detection. And for these irregular shaped objects like catheters, we use segmentation models. And yeah, so this is a few examples of that. And well, we reached the stage where we have done our work, and we want our researchers to analyze and validate our software. And this is an AUC curve of one of our models. So this is still not yet published, but hopefully soon. So this is where our model is compared to the competition and to the human radiologists. So if you know what AUC score is, this probably is AUC curve is something that you would see quite often as a data scientist. So for us, well, it might seem that the red curve is our performance actually. It might seem that we're like average at best, but actually when you look at bigger things, so there were like 7 or 8 competitors. We were like third ranked by AUC score, and we have beaten average, like not beaten, but like outperformed average radiologist by a very large margin. But for us, AUC curve is not very interesting. So it is nice to look at, but from the product perspective, we are actually interested in a single point in that curve. So something which is at 99.9 sensitivity, what kind of specificity we are able to reach. So I did some kind of zoomed in version of that. And when you look at that, you can see that, well, our model is like top 1 for performing model in that area. There is actually a radiologist which performs better. So one out of 20 radiologists was able to compare to our software on this kind of data set, which actually tells how hard it is for a human to perform well on this specific task. Yeah, so this was external validation. This is a graph from our internal validation for the very same model. So this is a detection model. We have been training this model for 3 or more years with different architectures and so. So actually the previous model was based on YOLO version 5. So on our internal validation, we also had 30% of specificity. So it was very nice to see that, well, these numbers hold up in the wild, I would say. But the good thing is that, well, this YOLO version 8 came out like 2 or 3 months ago. If I'm not mistaken, I'm not good with time. But the idea is that, well, we did some initial models, and our very first experiment had a specificity score of 54%. So for us, it is a very good moment in time to see that, like, state-of-the-art development in detection frameworks actually translate very well to our tasks. And hopefully we will be able to release a new version with much better metrics, maybe in a few months or so. So yeah, keep note of that. Yeah, so we also have other research groups who took our software and analyzed on their own data sets. So Radiology journal is the most prestigious journal in our field, and we have like our first publication there. So results are very good. So we have 28% specificity, 8% reporting fraction, and 0% error rate. So 8% might not look like a lot. So what do I mean by reporting fraction anyway? So if we took all the X-rays then in the hospital, how many of them we could automate? This is the metric we're interested the most. Yeah, so this is from one research group. Then we have another research group from Finland. They also did the very same thing on their own data set. And they also achieved very similar results. Specificity over 30%, 0% error rate, and double the reporting fraction. So it's kind of interesting to see. You might question why the reporting fraction change is so much different. So the problem is with what type of clients, what type of hospitals are using the software. So for example, if we take tertiary hospitals, like Santaros clinics, where there are lots of patients with serious diseases, the overall rate of how many normal-looking X-rays would be made in this kind of institution is kind of low. So I estimated between 20 to 40%. And when you multiply that by 30%, you get this estimation rate of 10 to 15% approximately. And on the other hand, we have patient clinics like polyclinics, various teleradiology clinics, and similar, where the flow of healthy patients is quite large. So saw cases we have several clients who have 80 to 90% of healthy patients coming in. So again, you multiply that by 30%. And you get this automation rate of 30 to 40%. So as you can see, the utility of this product depends very much on the type of medical institution, but it does not that, well, okay, we have only 10% automation, that this is not interesting and not useful for the hospital. It indeed is. Well, when you deal with very large volumes of patients, everything counts, right? And yes, so to finalize, our solution is first of its kind. So first of its kind in terms of certification. It was certified for autonomous use. There is no such equivalent device in Europe. And yeah, so this is something that we are very proud of, because it took us lots of effort to convince regulatory bodies to say, well, this product works, validation is solid, there are risks are managed, and so forth. So it is very, for us, it is very nice achievement, and we're trying to pursue our sales in that direction, trying to convince as many hospitals to try and use our ChestLink in their daily practice. Right. So this is the end of my presentation. So as we are an expanding startup, we have recently been funded for our Series A funding round. We're looking for people to join us, so specifically system administrators and software engineers. So if you're interested, or maybe you know who would be interested, please contact. I'll be happy to talk and explain how we do things in our company. Yeah. Thank you. Time for questions.
So let's do
Lots of hands.
Sorry, about abnormal case, do you provide segmentation for these cases or just nothing?
So the question is for if we provide segmentation masks only for abnormal cases. Well, yes, it's a kind of obvious answer, because when you're normal, there is nothing to segment.
But for abnormal, you didn't say that you provide also the segmentation for abnormal. Or like
So we do not, this is kind of a different product. We have like a different product which does that, but for the autonomous solution, we do not interact with radiologists at all. So this is all in the back end. So no humans involved, so no need to show segmentation masks.
So you mentioned at the 99.9 sensitivity, you reach 30% specificity. So for which task? Is it for classification, for detection, or for segmentation, or for all of them, and for which diseases?
Yeah, so this number, 28 and 36, is an overall specificity. So when we combine all the models, so there are models which have specificity of 80%, some models have of a specificity of 50%, but when you combine them together, kind of have this worst case scenario. So the model which has the lowest specificity kind of puts a threshold to what maximum you can achieve. So you just don't want to do errors. So this is why I talked about this model, because this is actually the model which sets us a benchmark what we can achieve. So this is the lowest performing model in terms of specificity, and if you are able to push that even higher, so this means that there's potential to improve the overall performance.
So this is for all of the diseases you are trying.
Yes, yes. Go on.
So to begin with, I'm quite impressed with the fact that you were capable of convincing the medical board and the regulatory body to fully automate the system, because from my previous experience and from my previous colleagues, most of the AI systems in the medical field were used as a suggestion, as an assistant towards a human being, and especially that you are targeting healthy individuals, where 1 out of 10,000 misses could lead to a fatality. That's quite impressive. So quite curious, if this is not a industry secret, what kind of strategies do you approach in being so certain that you can actually automate? Is it a thresholding of a confidence, something as simple as that, or I'm quite curious because it's really difficult to get certified.
Yes, very good question. Many people just cannot imagine how hard it is.
I can imagine.
It's
I know.
1,000 times harder than getting the certification for the assistant, right?
Exactly. That is really hard to get an assistant certification.
So it required a lot of effort. There were many people involved. We had several hospitals working with us. We had clinical teams from all around the world just trying to validate our approach. We had a huge clinical study, well, not huge, but clinical study with significant amount of images involved. And it took some convincing. It was not easy. We still actually receive questions from the regulatory body. Is this really okay? Does this still really work? And we just try to answer them, show that the proof we have gathered before, it still continues on when we have this solution in the proactively used.
My question was, what kind of strategies did you use to achieve this kind of confidence to where a regulatory body approved it in use and full automation in medical context?
I think that we were kind of able to explain clearly how we validate our models, how we do this optimization procedure I talked before. So this is the key part of know-how of how we do things, and we were able to convince that this is the way to go. We have statistical evidence. Also, I have not talked about our other products. So one of the other products is for quality assurance. So what it does is we receive images and reports already written by radiologists. And what we do is we kind of run our algorithms and try to detect mistakes made, especially on those cases where the radiologist has written that this is normal. And what we have observed that depending on the hospital, our error rate is about 2 to 5 times lower than a radiologist on this very same task. So this is a very strong proof that we perform better than state of the art. So state of the art being human for this task. So this is one.
Okay, that makes sense. Even then, it still have to get certified because
Yeah.
prefer a human over an AI.
So I'll get back to this slide, right? So this is the very important slide. I tell you that there is one competitor who's able to reach something similar. We know that it is not like pursuing this idea, but we have like 10 to 20 companies building that radiology system, and they're at the moment would not be able to provide such software because of this one single model.
Thank you.
Thanks. Please, any more?
One last question.
Go.
So when you said one single model, is it one specific task, like COVID did this one COVID classification or pneumonia or something like that, or encompasses everything?
So this is a specific task for one specific problem. I cannot say which because, well, the paper is not yet published, but yeah, it is for a specific task.
So it's safe to assume that you deal with each scenario with a different model, like for COVID, one model and...
Yeah, so as I talked before, we have this classification, detection, and segmentation models. So for these critical findings, let's say like fracture or pneumothorax, we have this one model for one task, and we push it to the limits as much as we can. So for the findings which are less relevant, we have one single classification model, which is able to predict, let's say, 70 findings at once. So just something like that.
All right, so big hand for Darius.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks everybody. Now it's time for chat and pizzas. They're already in the back. Thank you all for being here and see you next time. Bye-bye.